Good afternoon, welcome. This is a Marion City Council work session for Tuesday, September 17th, 2019. Thank you for joining us. First item that is marked for discussion is at the bottom of the second page of the agenda. Prior to that, is there anything on the agenda that anyone would like to discuss? Yes, ma'am. Ms. Udela?
On the first page, 1A3, I just wanted to bring up, because you and I had a meeting with a concerned citizen about handicap spaces during the farmers market.
Yes.
So I spoke with the city manager yesterday to make sure that for the Swamp Fox Festival and what's been mapped out, that we're cognizant of that and taking that into consideration. So for the record, because I know that that patron we spoke with listens, we're on it.
Yes, perfect. And I do know that, there is a plan being put in place. I don't know if you want to talk about it, Mike.
We do have a meeting with that individual prior to the council meeting on Thursday.
Terrific. Thanks.
Okay, good. All right, anything else prior to the item that's marked for discussion? All right, then, under community development number 1. Is that Mr. Hockett? Yes, sir.
Thank you. This is the staff seeking to begin the process of vacating alleys in the uptown area. When we started researching and we couldn't prove that all these alleys were vacated. We found some evidence, but not enough to say they were for sure vacated. So we had to begin that process to vacate and just become city property. So when the library project begins, we're not messing with alleys for 3 months. It's a longer process to vacate them. These are the 2 blocks, of course, we've identified that had some unknowns to them. So we'll just begin the process of vacating all the alleys. Again, I suspect some of them had been some time ago, maybe 100 years ago. We just, again, can't prove it. So we'll just vacate these alleys and we'll save some time for redevelopment of those lots when that should occur. It's time consuming enough. We were just seeking some direction to proceed.
Okay. Any questions or discussion on that? Makes sense to everybody? All right, thank you. The next item that's marked for discussion is under the second consent agenda, which is 2C. Otherwise, anything prior to that? Okay. 2C?
Yeah, staff had discussion. It's to receive and file a letter from Integrity Homes regarding continued development in this area. And per fire code, we do not allow over 100 residents inside of a one-way, one entrance in and out scenario, which this development is getting beyond that and would put it over that maximum capacity. So staff has discussed it, and there is discussion about the Smithland Drive that I think engineering or planning probably have a little more knowledge about, but per fire code, it's 100 residents with that one way in, one way out. Standard fire code was 30, but the city of Marion has amended that and increased it to 100 in the past. So we've already upped that. I believe it went through the appeals process of the boards and commissions and was denied through the appeals process as well.
Discussion? Any questions?
The area that we've talked about, that area in the past with Echo Hill and the development to the north, where there's been an illegal subdivision plat, and it's kind of eliminated some options for development up there as well. So, but the request to put Smithland in would, while that may solve some of the problems, it actually wouldn't even get it to the point where service could be provided in a manner that I think would meet the fire code, because they still haven't went far enough to get the ingress egress. So in addition to that, it would be a capital project, and it's not budgeted or funded at this point. It would take the city quite a long time to put that project together and make it work. So it's unfortunate, but that's just kind of the situation that works out as they plat and develop up there until we get an east access to that property. It is my understanding that the property to the east, owned by the Archdiocese, did hit the MLS, which is interesting news. So I think from the city's perspective, we thought that that property would probably remain undeveloped for quite some time. So we'll see what happens with that moving forward. But that would provide the opportunity through development for Echo Hill to be extended to 10th Street. So we'll see what happens. There's been no communication from the owners currently or a development interest to date, but I'm assuming that based on that area that we'll probably see some kind of conversation in the near future. So.
I think I would have to concur with the recommendations that have been made so far, that a connection for Smithland Drive doesn't solve what we're looking for. It doesn't connect to that immediate neighborhood, so to me that connection is not the solution.
Ideally, the property in the north, there would be the availability of a connection through the property owned by the Butchie family. But if you recall, we've actually been holding up that development because there was an illegal split, and that's kind of prevented that. They've come in just recently and said they would like to final plat that area. Staff has maintained the position that we're not going to allow for future development up there, consistent with that, with council direction and also staff's recommendations on that. They did say that they were going to seek some legal advice and bring that forward, and our communication back to them was, the only people that can change it is the city council, so that would be my advice, to bring that forward if they see fit. But clearly there's positioning on their behalf that, well, with this you would get that second ingress, and so that's going to be part of that conversation. But
I would have to agree also that I don't see that fixing the problem. I think it just would create more of a problem with people coming out of Echo Hill in the future. School back there, I can't think of the name. A lot of people cut down through there and through the neighborhoods, which I guarantee you no one in those neighborhoods are going to like that, and they're going to come in and tell us, no, we don't want this open. So
It'll create another problem.
it would create an idea, for sure.
Anyone else? Well, is there an action item for Thursday on this? No.
I believe it's just receive and file.
Okay. Just receive and file. Okay. All right. The next item marked for discussion is on page 4, which is E1. Prior to that, is there anything to discuss? Okay, then number E1 on page 4 under engineering.
Yep, so this is the contract for the fire station. So again, just showing aerial view of the new fire station. This will be the new headquarters. The front view from Tower Terrace. We received 10 bids for this project. Has a substantial completion of 8/30/20 and a final occupancy of 10/1/20. Liquidated damages of $1,000 per day. Council at that time recommended awarding. So now that we've sent the documents to the contractor, we've got them back signed via email. And so on Thursday, assuming council approves it, we will have a contract with Christner Contracting, and then we can start negotiations on value engineering, talking about schedule, talking about bird glass, all that fun stuff.
Okay, questions or comments?
A quick
Yes.
question.
Good
Can
deal.
you scroll back to the image at the first slide?
bids?
Or that one.
Oh.
One more. Yes. Where will additional overflow parking happen for training purposes or events or anything like that will at least be on one side of Irish, or how is that?
Right, so just to give everybody kind of some context, this is Irish Drive Extended. If you follow the mouse, this is Tower Terrace as it exists today. If you go farther to the north, that's proposed YMC site in Lau Park. So what it's done right now is this is staff parking only on the south side, and this is public parking. So it's not showing up? Okay. So the top of it is the public parking. The south of it is the employee parking. This section of Irish Drive will actually have no parking on both sides. There won't be street parking. Eventually, Gill Park will be extended, and there will be additional parking there. I'm not sure how many employees they would have for coming and doing their full training. There is a full build-out of additional parking if needed, but at this time, this is all that we're building as part of the project.
Oh, so we have more footprint for parking if we need it?
So let me see if I can get the mouse to, all right, that shows up. So eventually, this is a frontage road that gets extended,
Yep.
and so there'll be development that occurs over here. That would be additional overflow. We would have to have a partnership with whoever that is that develops that, but yeah, there'd be a potential overflow over here. There's also talk of, there was extending this and adding more parking, and then you can see this entrance here. This is for a future parking lot and driveway in a Gill Park that would be more parking as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Questions on that? Just so it's clear, then on Thursday we'll be approving the actual contract.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. All right, next.
Next item is the DOT contract for the removal of the railroad bridge. So this one, again, we received 3 bids through the DOT. It has the 80-20 split as part of the funding package for the CMAR Trail Project. Has a late start date of 8/24/20 with 40 working days and $1,000 per day in liquidated damages. So we've already recommended award, so this again would be actually signing the contract so they can move forward, and then once we have that, we can figure out what their schedule is and when they want to actually attack this.
So the removal could take place anytime after we sign the contract, but that's the late start date.
Right. They don't have to necessarily start by that date, but that's when the 40 days start.
Oh.
So if they don't start, the 40 days start regardless. If they run out of those 40 days, then they start getting charged $1,000 per day until the project is completed.
Okay.
But they can start before that. And whenever they do start, unless there is some winter work provisions in there, and depending on if they're meeting those requirements, they would not be charged during the winter if they're maintaining all lanes of traffic, stuff like that.
The sooner they remove it, does that help the construction of the bridge in terms of timeline for construction of the actual bridge?
So for the new bridge, obviously the sooner the better, but we don't have all that ironed out yet either. So
Yeah.
It's still not ideal, but I don't foresee a delay happening, but we will continue to push to get it done. But
Okay. And it's for everyone's purposes, I guess, just if you can just recap where the money's coming from. 80% of it is from DOT funding.
the Corridor Metropolitan Planning Organization, or the CMPO, is paying for 80% of the funds.
Yeah.
The other 20% of the city match is coming from city bonds.
And that's already been budgeted in. And
Yep, so it's part of the larger CMAR project, and rather than waiting and doing all of it at once, we're piecemealing it and building it as we can.
okay. Yeah. Just wanted everyone to be clear on that. Okay. Questions or comments on that? Next.
All right, so the next 2 items are the same topic. Basically, what we did was we had an oversized load that was pulling out of Marion onto, I believe, Highway 13 and got pulled over by a state officer. It ended up they did not have a Marion permit because we don't technically have a Marion oversized overload permit other than our hold harmless permit, even though per our ordinances we require it. And so they were actually cited. So because this came to light, we're now bringing it to the council's attention so that we can fix that in the future. So a few pictures that I have shown up here, this is what we're talking about when we say the DOT enforcement officers. So it's not necessarily RPD that's writing this, not that they couldn't. And a lot of the vehicles that we see with these oversized loads are the excavators that you see out on the subdivisions. This is a scraper for moving dirt, and a bulldozer are typically the types of oversized loads that we're going to see in the city. We did do a quick research for what the state does, what the city of Cedar Rapids does, and Lynn County, and that's all in your packet. But we're talking about, 100 to 300 permits per year. We don't necessarily want to do that for $2 a permit because it's not worth staff time to do that. There was discussion of, do we just say if they have a Lynn County permit that they're good within the city of Marion? But these vehicles are hard on our streets. They are the ones that are causing damage to our streets. We've had some oversized loads go through our roundabouts and take out signs and get jackknifed. So whether we want to look at actually having an internal policy where they have to pay. Some of those permit fees that were in your packet were $400 for an annual permit, and that's per truck. But it sounded like talking to them on the phone, they only charge $50. So obviously we need to do a lot more research and delve into it more. But we wanted to get council's direction first before we started going down the path of using staff time to do this. So what we've done in the interim is we've had contractors fill out the hold harmless, and we made it valid for a year so that there's no more tickets being issued while we figure this out, because it's not fair to the contractors to have them continue to get cited for something that was an oversight on the city's part.
Yes, Ms. Cadillo?
So when they go through the roundabout and take out a sign, do they pay back the cost it costs us to repair and get things back to how they were?
Their insurance company should, just like anything else that they take out, if they're caught. That's the bigger issue. If they're not caught, if we don't know who hits it.
But to that same point, then, we wouldn't know if they get away if they had a permit for an oversized load anyway, right?
They would not, but the state DOT can pull them over without probable cause just to do a check. So our police officers, and I'm putting on my lawyer hat, they have to have probable cause to pull a vehicle over to see if they have an OWI or something like that. The DOT can just pull you over, and they can check all your air pressure, make sure that every tire's inflated, making sure that you're not over your hours on driving. So they don't have to have any reason to pull you over. They can just spot check you.
And is the permit something that's visibly displayed, or is it something
they have it in their vehicle?
Okay.
So just like your registration, it's something they have to have in the vehicle. And so they were not able to prove that to the officer, and so when he called City Hall asking us if we had issued a permit, I couldn't say yes because they didn't have a hold harmless.
Steve?
Yeah, my 2 cents worth, and being from looking at it from the business sector, with the mountain of paperwork they have already, since they're already not filling out any paperwork, I agree with getting some income to offset some of the expenses that may be there. But personally, if we can just piggyback and say, gee, if you send in a copy of your Lynn County permit application or Cedar Rapids, and we'll just call it Marion and send in the fee, then you're good. I mean, I don't see any benefit, is there, to fill out a Lynn County one, a Cedar Rapids one, and then another Marion application. I mean, am I reading that correctly, that we're talking about that as being one of our options instead of filling out our design on our own form? We could just piggyback off one of theirs.
Yeah, we wouldn't have to redesign the form. If you look at the form, like the Lynn County one, is the DOT permit with Lynn County on it. So we wouldn't be reproducing or recreating any permits. It would just be processing it. If we put it at a rate that's high enough, we could actually use that to repair some of our streets.
Okay.
So there is a benefit to having a fee, but then it is more staff time as well. So there's pros and cons for both.
So what is the recommendation from the staff on which direction, staff time versus the permit revenue?
I would make it so if we went the route of we have a City of Marion permit, I would make the permit high enough that it recovers our staff time plus can do some street repairs with it. Now, is it going to reconstruct a whole bunch of streets for us? No, but is it going to be able to do a few patches here and there? Yes.
But right now they can get a hold harmless.
They can, but it's not an annual permit. It's a per permit, and there's no fee. So
Right.
we don't, unless they're moving a house or something, they generally don't fill out a truck permit.
Well, we know a lot of those
They're on our
loads are
roads
going
every
through
day.
Marion all the time.
Yep.
I mean, in fact, we want that. We desire it just as part of the development going on throughout the community. So it's not going to go away.
Correct.
Okay. Okay.
But if, say, you're like, if Cedar Rapids truly does charge $400 per year per truck, and then that truck just hauls whatever it needs to for that day, then it's processing that permit once, and then we have that $400 to go towards a patch or something, minus the staff time it took to process that.
This seems like a lot.
Yes. Randy?
Mike, how does that work when we have transient trucks that come through? Are they supposed to, let's backtrack here a little bit, because the reason why we have registrations and license on vehicles is to pay for the infrastructure. And that's what these trucks are doing. They're beating our city up. And though that we've appreciated it in our town, that's why our sewers are failing, that's why our streets are wearing down and they're breaking down, is because of these heavy trucks that are going across it. So part of my question is we've got a lot of commercial businesses that reside here in our city limits, which is tearing my thought to this process. But then we also have a lot of just coming right straight through town from one side to the other. If they travel through the city limits, are they supposed to have that day permit as well too, even though their destination is not in town?
So hopefully for most of those vehicles that are transient that are not stopping within Marion, they're using Highway 100, and that would be just the state permit. Yes, part of that is in the city of Marion, but the DOT maintains that street. So it'd only be for streets that we 100% maintain ourselves. So Business 151 and all of our internal network would be the streets that they would need it on if we made it a city permit. There would be a learning curve. I'm sure there's going to be contractors out there that don't have it, but just like not knowing the speed limit does not mean that you have to obey the speed limit. So.
Right, and I'm one that's in favor of this. I'm witnessing all these big trucks coming in on Alburnett Road over there where I reside, and these trucks are breaking that Alburnett Road down as we're trying to put that culvert underneath, Alburnett as it is right now. I've been watching those low boys come in and swing off that rock off the side of these trucks, and it is something that we got to find a way to offset these costs that these things are doing to the city. So thank you. I appreciate the clarification on the transient trucks, even though I know they go by miles, and these guys have to make the shortest distance for their logs. So sometimes 100 is not the preferred route. If they can save on their log time, they're going to take whatever back roads they can get with to do that. So thanks. I appreciate it.
So you're in favor of the
Absolutely.
state?
Yep. These are fees that we haven't been collecting on, just like things that we are experiencing from our competing cities that we haven't been collecting those fees for. And I think it's time that we really start to watch some of these things, because it's coming at the back of our taxpayers. I mean, we already can't get our infrastructure fixed internally, and this is part of the problem why.
Yes, Will.
So am I reading this correctly, or maybe explain it to me? So right now a truck needs to get a permit from the Iowa DOT for $400, and then if they're in Cedar Rapids, they need to get a permit for $400 also.
So the
Or at
state
$800?
the state only charges $50, and that's statewide.
It says $400 at the top of this.
That's where there's some confusion. So
Okay.
does it have the Cedar Rapids logo or the Lynn County?
Iowa DOT,
But on the top right, does it say Lynn County?
yes.
Then that's the Lynn County permit.
Okay,
That's
so
what
they have to
we're-
get one from Lynn County, the state, city, each city.
Yes.
So does Hiawatha, Robbins, do they all have?
We haven't checked into that yet
Okay.
because we didn't want to go down the rabbit hole if that was something that council didn't want us to spend staff time in. Because as you know, we're busy right now with construction.
Yeah.
So we've only looked at the state, Lynn County, and Cedar Rapids.
So the action on Thursday is to authorize you to look into it more?
To look into it more or tell us how to proceed. If you want us just to say if they have a Lynn County permit or a Cedar Rapids permit, then they're good. Then we'll work with legal to modify the ordinance.
Yes, I think the city attorney has.
I'm going to take that legal hat back from Mr. Barklow. One of the things that we're talking about just over here at our end of the table, maybe as a way to simplify this, would be to discuss with the other cities making this a multi-jurisdictional permit, maybe through the CMPO, and then just split the funds.
That's what I was thinking. I mean,
And I
is there
can't
a way
take
to
credit
do
for that idea. That's coming from Amal. I think it's a great idea, but I don't get to claim credit for that one. But that's something that first of all,
The county.
we are the Robbins city attorneys also, so we can address that with Robbins easy enough. We speak with the Cedar Rapids attorneys and sometimes with the Hiawatha city attorneys as well. So it would be a pretty simple matter for us, if that's council's desire, to look at making this just sort of a single permit for the whole municipal area, figure out how the funds are divided, if that's so. And again, I think, as Mr. Barklow was saying, we're just looking for some direction as to what the city would like to see, but that's something that legal could certainly investigate if that would be council's directive.
Sure, go ahead.
I think that's a great idea. The pushback that we'll get back on that will be somebody giving up some money, because they are taking that revenue in from those permits. So share pooling it back into the system. In theory, that sounds like a great idea, but there will be the pushback, because that is a revenue stream that they are already utilizing. So that's something that we're going to have to be prepared for. So I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that.
It always is. The other side of that coin is, if every municipality starts having their own permit fees, then everybody's going to suffer from it. And so,
And I would agree. Perhaps maybe we can find out what Cedar Rapids is collecting on that line item. I think we would be shocked as far as what revenue that brings in. But I agree. I don't like the fact, and I'm thinking of our contractors here in town and what the additional expenses would be. But I always go back to, hey, you know what? That's running a business. That means our bids are going to go up. But I don't like to pay unemployment tax, but guess what? I got to pay unemployment tax. So business is business. So this is something that we need to address. And again, it's something that has been falling on deaf ears for many, many years. And we should be, those trucks are tearing up our roundabouts, and it's those trucks. It's not the local residential four-wheel cars. It's the semi-trucks that have no respect for those roundabouts. They're just running over the curbs. So I'm going to stand firm on saying I am supporting these permit issues, but I'm in favor of trying to find a solution to try to equalize that across the sistering cities on that issue.
Okay. We still don't know what the recommendation is. Or do you have a recommendation?
I could go either way on it. That's why I'm asking for council's direction on it.
Okay.
I think Amal's idea is great, and I could get behind that. Otherwise, I'm not in favor of spending the time and the extra paperwork and more regulations and blah, blah, blah. This is the first time this has come up since I've been seated here, so unless it becomes an issue, I wouldn't want to put any more attention on it. I do agree, Randy, there's a wear and tear issue, but we don't enforce this. The DOT enforces it. We're not going to pull these people over and collect this. So anyway, I think we should pursue the CMPO route, and then if it doesn't make it through there, I can't really tell you that I'd support it much further at this time.
Okay, Will?
I agree. I like the idea that came from Amal. If not, I think Steve said it, or maybe Mike said it, piggyback off of maybe Lynn County, and just if you've got a permit with Lynn County, we'll add $50 or whatever to make it a permit in Marion and not do more paperwork type of thing.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to
Want the money, but
collect
not
that
the
money.
paperwork.
Yeah, you wouldn't
Well,
be
if you
able to
make
collect,
it a low, if you piggyback off them,
I know.
you wouldn't be able to collect any money. You would just say if they have a Lynn County permit, then it's good in Marion. So there
I see
would
what
be
you're
no
saying.
additional revenue. That's why having your own permit is the only way to actually generate revenue.
Okay.
Okay, but at this point in time, again, I agree with everything they're saying. But the one thing we haven't even talked about is how much revenue we're really even contemplating. So I don't know if we're talking about $1,000 or $100,000. And I'm sure it's not that big, but, you know, I think I support the overall direction they're talking about, but if you're only talking about a few $1,000s, then it's not worth our time. So I have no concept of how many dollars we're really talking about yet, Mike.
100,000.
Huh?
Probably 100,000.
Yeah, I would say it's at least 100,000 based on the numbers that are in the memo.
Okay. Then
That's worth it.
Okay, then I'd agree. I support
Not
what
chicken
everybody
feed.
else is saying.
It's not chicken feed.
Yeah, it's not chicken feed. Okay.
As we're finding hundreds of thousands of dollars of things that we haven't been collecting for, it's.
That's a big enough number I would go.
A fiscal responsibility.
Okay.
But it's probably going to get, just like you said, it turned around and charged us in bids
Right.
on things. But I guess for private, it wouldn't. But
Yeah, how do you tell the person that can't get enough water on their next house that's on fire because the water lines can't get repaired or the sewers aren't getting repaired? I mean, what's our budget going to be for sewers? These roads just cannot support it anymore. They weren't built for it, and yet we continue to allow it. So I guess do we got a direction or not? I mean, do we need to even take it to Thursday, or do you just need a direction
Well,
today from staff to
Yeah, I
proceed?
mean, Thursday I have it written as motion directing staff to create an oversized and overload truck permit policy. So unless you want to change that language, that's how it's written right now, so.
The action to actually put it in. Okay.
When's the next CMPO meeting? I mean, maybe we should have that discussion before we proceed. I think everybody's in agreement with that philosophy, perhaps, so maybe it could be taken there. I think you both are on that. So if that meeting's coming in the near future, maybe that could get on the agenda and you could find that out first, because I think if they would be amenable to that, then everybody else is on board with that. If not, then maybe we go back and have staff spend the time and dig and look at how much and all of those things that come with it.
Okay. Yeah, Paul?
You take the weight and size off their permit, or how do you determine that?
So in your council packet, a lot of them have, what is your axle spacing, what is, a lot of that, it's right from the DOT permit that has all that information. So it does have the weight, the width, everything on their permit
That they fill out?
that they fill out, yes.
Steve?
Let's come back. I don't want to beat this too much, but by the time we get here Thursday, let's have an estimate on how much revenue we may really be talking about based upon what we think is a reasonable amount for the fee, because, I mean, even looking at the memo, Lynn County charges $400 according to what you're having here, and Cedar Rapids is anywhere from $20 to $50. So if we're using $20 and $50, that's a whole different ballgame than $400. And so is the revenue. So, again, what I would think I would be supporting would be based upon what we really think the revenue.
Well, the revenue can be whatever we want it to be. I didn't want to spend a bunch of staff time on it if there was no support from council. That's why I'm having a discussion now and doing that small amount of research before we dive into it. Because I don't want to spend months doing this research only to find out that you guys don't support it to begin with.
Okay, but part of it's going to come back to what is a reasonable amount for the fee. I'm not, at Cedar Rapids, so are we going to be looking at more at fees compared to what Cedar Rapids is doing?
Yes.
Which I assume is what's going to be your recommendation. And I don't see how that gets anywhere near $100,000. That's all I'm saying is if we go with what Cedar Rapids is talking about, are we going to have fewer number of applications? And given the amount of revenue, I don't see $100,000 here. I'm just swagging it here. So
what the memo says on the front compared to what the actual application says are two different things. Because the application says $400 for annual, and then on the front
Cedar Rapids?
For Cedar Rapids, and then on here it says $50. So
okay, then let's get it straightened out. All I want to know is what are we talking about?
And we can certainly ballpark that. We'll contact them and see what they're bringing in. While you've been discussing it, I was trying to look at Cedar Rapids' published budget and Lynn County's budget to see if it was broken down as its own individual line item, but it looks like it's lumped together with the general licenses and permits. So I can't really break that out on its own to be able to give you an estimate just based off what they have published offline. So we'll have to find out a little more. But it seems like there's support for from the council to move forward with doing some more research on it and putting some staff time into seeing if it is a viable potential source of revenue for us.
Yeah, I don't see that anybody is like just completely opposed to the idea, but I think you need more information to really make a well-reasoned decision on whether or not it's worthwhile. So.
And I would like to add as well too, as economic development is occurring right now, at some point when this construction all slows down, so will this. I would hate to think that, I wouldn't want anybody to think that we're making a decision because it's a revenue-based items for the city. So it's kind of like one of those things, well, if it ain't worth our time, we're not going to do it. What's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. So $1,000 to go towards infrastructure that's been damaged by it is still the process. So,
and we've done that in a number of other areas where we've said the user has to pay the fee, or we're trying to have expenses paid by the actual people using it or causing it or whatever. So, I mean, it's kind of consistent with that. That we're collecting something to take care of the infrastructure damage. So, okay.
All right. Well, I'll see what Janet can find for me by Thursday then.
Okay. Thank you. Number 5. This. Am I on the right thing? Mm-hmm. Yes.
Put you on pass the gavel.
I'm sorry?
Pass the gavel.
For the sanitary sewer. Number 5.
Oh, did I mix them up? You're off. I'm off. So it's just receive and file of the sanitary sewer study that you guys got presented to from Steph. So we really didn't talk about what those growth limits were going to be, but if you have any input on that, we will take it. Otherwise, we have gotten the shape files from them, and we will use it as we look forward to future planning efforts.
Everybody hear that?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
So Steve and I asked Lon yesterday about, when will we have that discussion as a council and get more information and blah, blah, blah. And I know that the strategic planning that we're in the process of will lead us to a discussion where we can come back to this further. But that was very interesting to see and something that should be on our radar. So I think it'll come back up in a few months at least when that piece comes. So more to come.
Okay. All right, I will pass the gavel on this next one.
Okay.
All right, so number 6 is just approving the contract with LL Pelling regarding the HMA resurfacing project in the amount of $1,025,331. We will be able to keep it within the $1 million budget. There's some items in there that, because our x-ray vision doesn't work, we don't know exactly what's underneath that surface, so we are conservative when we make those estimations. Because we're letting this later in the season, we put a completion date of 6/26/20 and $300 per day in liquidated damages. Because Pelling also got the airport project, I'm going to assume they are not going to do any of our city streets. They'll wait till the spring to start that project. Get the airport done.
Any questions for Mike on this one? Seeing none, okay, thank you, Mike. Okay. Community development, Mr. Trahern.
We'll get this down.
Oh, please take your time.
Well, there's the map of the previous subdivision I meant to show earlier, but we'll move on. The first item start is Echo Ridge Estates final plat. As you can see this, you had a fairly detailed staff report on this, but the property is located west of Alburnett Road, north of Echo Hill. You can see it's the third edition, and it's a little bit farther off the road, off of Echo Hill Road, but if you drive up and through there, if you've been there recently, there's a lot of improvements that have been completed. 37 single-family lots, about 2.75 units per acre, and 13-acre development. Surety's been posted for all the remaining improvements, so this would provide them the opportunity to start building. I'd just like to illustrate that we'll probably be showing a little bit of more of the final plats unless there's concern of council on time, especially on the periphery, as we just talked about the sewer capacity issues. I think it's important that the council kind of just be aware of the units going in, the lots, and then I think the density, the units per acre, is important just to kind of have kind of on the forethought as we move through these developments. This is on the outer edge of the northwest side of the community. Just north of here, there are limitations on development. I think the moratorium's in place in that area. So if property were to be annexed or request to be annexed there, we would have very difficult time providing sewer service. So just so the council's aware, that's the only reason I really highlighted this final plat. But in the staff reports, I'll make comments to that effect in the future. Any questions on that? The next item is...
Wait, I do.
I'm sorry.
Okay, can I?
Yes, go ahead.
So Tom, you mentioned something, and it caught my eye when I was looking at the build-out about the really small lot sizes, and I'm sure that they're within their purview to do that based on what we currently spell out for that. I'm just wondering if it would be worth a conversation in the future when we're doing our comp plan, or when it would be appropriate if we would want to, for single-family homes in the medium density, increase by just a little bit the ratio of land to house because of the sewer, because of the schools, because of all of the impacts that it brings when we continue to jam a lot of houses in a little bit of space. And I get that a lot of developers probably don't want to hear that. I don't know if the council has a palette for that discussion, but it's something that in my time on planning and zoning was a concern to me, and then with the sewer study, and as I just mentioned, we're building 2 more schools, and I'm wondering if it would help us get a little bit more control on the development and the density that comes. It's not like they're apartment buildings or townhomes or something like that where you'd expect it. They're single-family homes. So when would it be appropriate to have that discussion if we were to have it? Is it these ward planning meetings that we have upcoming, or what?
Well, I think a lot of that will come as we talk about growth management in general.
Mm-hmm.
The new zoning code proposals, or they're adopted, but the new map would lay that zoning on top of it. We tried to divide our single-family districts into more districts, so there's more specificity in the plats when they brought in. Right now, most of the community is zoned R2 with a 60 by 100 foot minimum lot size. There aren't many 60 by 100 foot lot sizes, and they get all the way up to 85 by 150 in the R2 zoning district. So we've created additional zoning districts to kind of help with that conversation. I will say, though, and I think it's important just to know that lots are getting smaller.
Mm-hmm.
They are. Land prices are going up, so lots get smaller, which isn't necessarily a bad thing if the developments are done correctly. Density isn't bad. Actually, density is it's more compact and provides a more bang for the buck as it relates to infrastructure. So there's certainly a weight that has to happen with that. And I think that's a conversation when we get into more of the growth management issues. And I think that's going to be something I know internally we've been talking about it, and I think over the winter we were going to try to address some of those things in conjunction with the sewer study
Okay.
and so. But yeah, that's kind of why we want to show it, is just illustrate that lots are getting smaller.
Yeah, and I
density is-
know land prices are going up, but in 5 years, if they go back down again, we'll have 5 years worth of growth based on what was just happening at that time, as opposed to how do we want our community to look and perform. And that's what I'd really like to have the larger conversation about, is not just being reactive to the market, but what's the vision for Marion. So anyway, it's good to know that that's a future conversation. Thanks.
Any other questions for Mr. Trehorn on this item before we move on?
The next item is identified. This is the acquisition plat for 35th Avenue. I just happened to drive by down 35th Avenue. If you've driven out there, you can see the school is well out of the ground. We are indicating it by the logo here. So this is north of 35th Avenue. As a part of this the school project, they'll be completing road improvements on 35th. In working with the developer to the south, there was an agreement reached regarding the dedication of the right-of-way at this time, and then there was an agreement that at such time he final plats the property here, there would be a return to the city for the cost associated with his proportionate share of the road. So it's just a development agreement. Council approved this. It's consistent with it, so we'll be obtaining the right-of-way through this acquisition plat. Pretty straightforward.
Any questions on that item?
The next item, F3, is the gemstones permit prior to final plat. As the council's aware, it takes a waiver of the subdivision regs to allow a plat or a building permit prior to the approval of the final plat. This is a request for one permit prior to. The area is highlighted in red. It's within the gemstones addition, and you can see that it's directly adjacent to a previously platted area where the improvements are. And this is off Google Earth, so there's more improvements out here than are illustrated. So there is direct access to this. I would point out that as a part of the resolution approving this, there would be no temporary or final occupancy provided to the facility until the property is final platted. So this is that time of year. I know I've said it a couple times where we're going to start to get these in to provide the guys the opportunity to get homes built over the winter and not have to be on the hook for quite a few of the improvements at this time. So.
Any questions on that item for Mr. Trehorn?
So the next item is the public hearing. On Thursday, there'll be the public hearing on, or reopening the public hearing on the airport overlay zoning districts, and then also the second reading. The way that before we get into the details, but where the way that the legislation is prepared, it would be approving an amendment to the Marion Code of Ordinances to allow for the airport overlay. We'll want to make sure that that amendment is included, and we'll make sure that it's worded on the agenda. I think the council was asking for some amendments to that ordinance. It was passed at the first reading. I'll do my presentation, but we'll make sure that the wording is appropriate for Thursday, depending on how the council reacts to the conversation this evening, if that makes sense. So at the last meeting, there was discussion regarding Zone A, the runway protection zone at either end of the north-south runway being either free and clear of obstructions, or what was proposed was maintaining a limited development opportunity in those areas and maintaining the glide slope of the approach zone. I think the council was kind of torn on that and was seeking direction from the Marion Municipal Airport Committee. I did have the opportunity to take that back to the committee last Wednesday. Mr. Shernan was at the meeting and heard there was quite a bit of conversation relative to this issue. But ultimately, the committee did recommend to proceed with maintaining that area free and clear, which is different than what was being proposed. And I think the council was leaning that way, if I could go so far to say that. And so were unanimous in their recommendation to proceed in that manner. So within the code that I've provided, I did make the amendment. There wasn't much of an amendment. It was literally one sentence, but it is provided in the code that you have. So that is a change to the ordinance. I did want to point out that in review of the ordinance, I did go back through it, and both Mr. McCartan and Mr. Sherman in private conversation had indicated or wondered why the listing of uses in the zone chart were not specifically the same as in the guidebook. When we originally went through the ordinance and the guidebook regulations, we didn't feel that a lot of them really needed to be spelled out. We have underlying zoning, and I think in a lot of communities that use that guidebook, there may not necessarily be underlying zoning. So they're using that as guidance to control all land use. So we did not prepare the list consistent with the guidebook. We still, even as you can see in the ordinance that I provided, we did add in a number of uses. They were highlighted in yellow. But we still didn't put all of them in. We still left out. One of them was a casino. I didn't think we needed to regulate casinos, so as an example, through the airport overlay zoning. But so there were a few that we did leave out, and I can provide those to you before Thursday if you like. I didn't spell them out specifically, but we did add in a number of them. I think even before the last meeting, I had indicated that we probably should add the residential uses back in. So I hope you had a chance to review that. I was going to pull them up in the PDF here if you just give me 1 second. Why didn't that go away? No. Always happens.
Oh, I would assume that the red
Oh, look at there.
replacement can't be red.
So within the ordinance, I know this is difficult for the public to see, and maybe what I can do is go to 1 second.
This is transportation uses.
You can see within the pages, I think there's 3 pages of the listing of uses. The yellow highlighted were the ones that I added, and the red indication is where we differed from the guidebook. I would point out that a lot of them are in zone D and E, which are the surfaces that really are in between the runway. So that's where there's a limitation on 150-foot ceiling. And if you look at the last page of the ordinance where the map is, it's quite a bit of area where there's not a lot of impact, except for maybe the way the air traffic would travel around the airport. Providing additional review for every use in the zone D would essentially mean that we would be providing additional review over almost anything that is developed in the city. We feel that in that area, single-family retail and industrial uses for the most part are compatible in those areas. And we do spell out in certain areas where we think there would be additional review required. If you have a height requirement and underlying zoning, and then this guidance is provided on top of that, I think we've got a pretty good coverage of that, of those areas. I will point out that there were a number of changes in zone B and C as well in some of those uses, and I only have one explanation to that, and I think that we transcribed them differently. If you notice, if you go through them, we went from areas where it's non-compatible in zone B, and then additional review in zone C, like in group living. They were just backwards, and I think that was a transcription error as we went through. So there's been a number of changes in that listing, but I wanted to make sure that we had it right, so I did go through the ordinance again. But I do think adding the uses, I think that's addressing the concerns. We held the public hearing. 2 people asked for those uses to be added. I think it doesn't hurt the ordinance. It's the public hearing. We're soliciting feedback. I think being responsive to that feedback is what we're doing, and I think it makes sense to add those in if there's concern by that, especially since one of them was a landowner. So addressing that, I had no problem with making that recommendation. One area I would like to just identify, and I think it is important, is the ag activities section on page 14. As much of this area is going to be located in the county or have ag uses around it, so the property to the south that's in the city it's agricultural in use. I think it was important to walk through this in a little better manner. The guidebook is essentially saying that in zone B, which is the approach zone off the end of the runway, which extends to the edge of the conical surface. If you look at your map, it's hard for me to do this and show the map at the same time. I can if you want me to. But in the approach zone, if they had ag-related uses, whether it's animals or farm or residential, as additional review, I mean, that didn't seem, it seems compatible in my mind. And when we were looking at it from a land use perspective, we felt that same way as staff. There was also a non-compatible listing for facility-related bulk storage, grain elevators, and grain seed sales in the approach zone. They had non-compatible, which that was a very specific conversation that was had at length previously when we were talking about grain legs, if you recall, several months ago. We identify that as additional review where the guidebook is saying it's non-compatible. We have a height requirement. There's no reason in my mind that would be a non-compatible use as long as it meets that height requirement. And I think the ag community would be very upset to understand that we were saying that a grain elevator was not going to be permitted in the approach zone. In Zone A, completely understand. That's right off the end of the runway within 1,000 feet. So that ag area is where we do provide for some variability from the guidebook that I think it's important that the council understands it. It's not like we're doing this just to appease anybody. It just feels like that's overreaching when you already have a height requirement in those areas. And we've maintained that position from day one, that they could have that facility as long as they met the height requirements.
Randy, can I ask a quick?
Yes, Renee, please go ahead.
So the additional review, is that staff review? Is that council vote? Is that planning and zoning? What constitutes AR?
So additional review is a requirement that maintains that the airport zoning administrator, myself or the designee, would review that against the items on page. I think it's 12, but on 11. You can see at the bottom it talks about uses found to require additional review shall be evaluated for general compatibility by the airport zoning administrator for potential conflicting land uses or potential negative effects that may need to be mitigated. So at the last meeting, I did indicate that would need to be done by the Airport Zoning Board of Adjustment. That is only in the event that there's a disagreement. So if someone comes in and says, I want to build, I'm trying to think of a use, but if I wanted to do some kind of...
A grain leg?
Right? A grain leg, yeah. Okay, a grain leg comes in and they want to build it and it's going to be taller than is permitted, and we say no, well, that's a zoning variance. So they'd have to go to the Airport Zoning Board of Adjustment, which would be made up of 2 county people, and county members as well as city members. It's a whole other Board of Adjustment. Same rules apply as the city and county boards, but it's a different board that would be created. If it's a use that's like, let's say it's someone wants to open some kind of a facility that's going to have a large bird attractant. Maybe they want to do a recycling center in the approach zone, and they want to do open storage. Well, okay, so maybe that's a permitted use in the underlying zoning. It's identified as additional review in this ordinance, so that's when they'd come in and say, okay, we need additional review. A report would be provided that would address noise, high concentrations of people, tall structures, visual obstructions, or wildlife and bird attractants. Now, I may say, looking at this review, the open storage is going to cause wildlife attractants, and in this area, I don't think we want to go with that, so we're going to deny the request. They could appeal that to the the Airport Zoning Board of Adjustment for my interpretation, and that is currently how any use is in the city. So, the city's interpretation of the code can always go to the Board of Adjustment relative to zoning for an interpretation.
Okay.
So.
Thank you.
Tom, before we move on, can we have just one more time clarification? I just want to pull out as an example here. Go to heavy manufacturing right there, if you would. Third row down over into this is going to be Zone C there. The red indicates your recommended change with that, but we're seeing a strikeout in those. Is that an editing error, or we just want to make sure there's no loss of interpretation on that?
So
Are we recommending the AR from an NC, but I see the strikeout through it?
No, so the AR was what we had before.
Okay, so you're saying, okay, very good. I just want to make sure there's clarity on that.
Absolutely, yep.
So everybody understands.
And where there was a strikeout, we went, the guidebook is the black text, and then the red was where staff made a recommendation, and then if there's a strikeout, you can see that we're changing that recommendation.
Okay, so in that case, the code was an AR, and we're striking that to an NC in that particular example. Okay, I just want to make sure everybody was clear on that.
And you can see those uses lifted under heavy manufacturing would be ones that would have a smokestack. That's fine, sir.
Very good. No Sinclair here. Okay. Any follow-up questions for Mr. Trahern on this particular item? I think it was a very informative section because there's a lot of details in that, and it's a critical move as we move forward, and there's going to be some additional things coming forward, obviously, and needs with the Marion Airport. Renee, go ahead.
Yep, so we left the public hearing open, but we're tweaking the language, and actually, it's, like you said, it's a small tweak, but it's a sentence that's an important sentence about leaving Zone A free and clear. Mm-hmm. So do we go back to that being a first reading, or is it still a second reading, but we just point out the tweak?
I would amend the ordinance consistent with what's proposed. This recommendation to amend the ordinance as proposed, hold the second reading, and leave the public hearing open. And then the public hearing would be open for the third reading. If there's concern or someone raises that issue and there's a desire to have an additional reading, that can happen, and the council can direct that.
Okay. Thank you.
So just for clarification, we'll again allow people to speak pro and against that, leave it remained open. We'll move on to the next reading of the amendment as modified and continue on leaving that open. Is that what your recommendation is?
Yeah, and I don't think there'd be any issues in leaving the public hearing open.
So apparently everybody has an attorney hat on tonight. Yeah, I think that I do agree with what Mr. Trahern recommended. Really, the public hearing will close whenever the executive in charge of the public hearing decides to close it. So there's no reason you couldn't leave it open through a third hearing as well.
Okay. Very good. Just for the record, I did not have that hat on, so thank you. Make sure we got.
I have an engineer's hat on here.
I'd like to make sure we got all of our ducks in a row. Any follow-up questions for Mr. Trahern on that item before we move on? We appreciate all the feedback and input on that. There's been a lot of work and patience as we navigate through that. No pun intended. Does that take us up to number 6 then, Tom?
I'm still on.
It's Tom's show.
That was, one second. I'm going to come to the podium for the rest. So the next item is the 7th Avenue Commercial Addition Final Plat. One of the reasons I really wanted to just speak to the issue, we don't need to go on too terribly long with this, but it's the west side of the roundabout, so 7th Avenue, 6th Avenue. This is the location of Lebeda, and this is the new building that's going up now. It's the First Federal. I wanted just to point out that with this final plat, we're getting the two lots, and we're cleaning up this west addition where Lebeda was, and we're getting the easements, I think the easements are already in existence, but this puts it on the plat for a public access easement that will come in off 6th. So there'll be a joint access when constructed that will go into First Federal and then also into Lebeda, which will provide access to the west of the property that's currently the car wash. With this, we'll also get the dedication of the right-of-way on the north side of Lebeda. Currently, the sidewalk is there, but it was to be dedicated with a final plat, so that'll come in on as well. And it really cleans up the property lines. There were numerous plats of surveys associated with this, and I know this might not mean a lot to the council, but from a staff perspective, cleaning up these properties, and as we go through the corridor and doing that, you've seen us do a lot of plat of surveys. This is an example of where we've taken property that the city previously owned, we're able to combine it, make it usable, and see it redeveloped. And I think that's just how we've been doing. And I know you see some cost. You're going to see another conversation we talk about at the west end, at the west end when we're talking about the area near Country Kitchen and Zio Giano's. We're going to do some platting work there, which when development occurs, we can easily transfer pieces of property to them without having to worry about it at the time. So we're trying to be proactive in getting those pieces cleaned up, and then when a final plat comes in and development can occur, it's a really easy transfer. So this is an example of how we like to do these. So
Kind of like vacating alleyways, Tom?
Yeah, see, we're moving forward beforehand, so trying to anyway. This will just provide that opportunity for that project to move forward. If you'll recall, they did get a permit prior to final plat, and that's the other reason I wanted to point out, to provide the grading and get the footings in the ground. They have worked with us well on this. They've kind of went back and worked with the owner of Lebeda to ensure that we can get this platting done with one plat. So appreciate that, and just wanted to point that out.
Okay.
What's the next start item, if you could tell me?
So at this time, I'll turn the meeting back over to the mayor. This will be number 10. This will be the public hearing regarding the rezoning of R5.
Was there anything else prior to that time, though? Prior to that, item 7, 8, or 9? If anybody has any questions, I know we have one of the parties here in the audience. So, no questions on 7, 8, or 9? Okay.
So the Seven Hills project, on Thursday we'll have a public hearing regarding the rezoning of Mr. Hill's property. I think the council's been I think the council and a lot of folks have been awaiting this project to move forward. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the location and going through things unless the council has questions. I will say that Dave's been working diligently with Mr. Hill on this, and I hope that the staff report provided a really good background story for that project. Of course, the area is being rezoned to PDR, and the area is identified here between 3rd and 4th Avenues. The north side of the property here, there's multiple properties being rezoned to PDR to provide way for the project. The project did go to Planning Commission. There were very limited comments from the public at that meeting. We did have someone did contact us and was concerned about parking. And as you know, in reading the report, there are some parking requirements that with the PDR are being provided for that would not normally be provided for in traditional zoning. I believe there's 5 or 6 spots. They would be 5 or 6 spots parked under traditional zoning. However, some of the units are 1 bedrooms, And what we're finding, and I think if you look back on some of our variance requests that have been done, and even with the senior housing project, we've reduced that number. And within our new codes, and when we get looking a little more closely at parking, you're going to see us change that parking requirement depending on the types of uses that it allows. So we're comfortable with the parking. There's also a great deal of off-street parking within the project, so we're very comfortable with that conversation.
Okay. That'll be 10 and 11.
Yes, I just think it's exciting to show the picture again. This is going to be a pretty phenomenal project in that neighborhood.
Huge improvement.
And the use of the buildings as it moves forward is really going to be nice. You can see that there's off-street parking allowed within that area on the sides of the street, and there's very limited use of it. And then I think it's important to point out that the parking will be maintained internally. So while you see from the curbside, you're going to see a lot of the building frontage, the parking's in the rear of the building, which is exactly what we're trying to encourage in the corridor. And I think this project's a really good example of how density done correctly in a redevelopment project with very thoughtful mentality can be done very nicely. So we're really excited about the project.
Good. Questions, comments? All right. So does that, the approval of the rezoning, does that then set things in motion for the relocation of the houses?
So the public hearing will be on Thursday in the first reading, and then of course it's 3 readings.
Yeah.
So that'll take us to the second meeting in October.
Final approval of the rezoning, is that what we're waiting on to?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. So once that's finally approved, then there'll be things in the work for moving the houses.
That's correct, yeah. I haven't talked to Mr. Hill lately to understand if he's going to try and stage everything so it happens. I'm sure he's wanting to hear what happens out of the public hearing and the first reading, and then I think that would be an excellent question for him at the public hearing. I understand he's going to be back for the meeting.
He'll be here? Okay.
So I think that would be a very good question for him.
Okay, thank you. Number 12.
Is that Rookwood?
No, Rookwood was not marked.
Past
and
Rookwood.
that was number 9.
My apologies.
Did you want to talk about
number
Rookwood?
12 was I just wanted to point these out. These are some requirements that are being provided by the Department of Transportation as a part of some of the projects that we receive dollars for. I didn't know if there was any specific or questions on these. I might actually defer to Mike on some of these. But these are required items that we need to adopt as a part of receiving the funds. So I know there were some lengthy conversations as a part of those as we provided those, but I didn't know if there was any specific questions. We do this I think we're required to have them updated every 5 years, but really it's just reinforcement of federal standards regarding discrimination.
Okay.
The DOT won't let other funding agreements go through unless those are through, so.
Yeah.
No more trail funds unless those are approved.
Did you have anything on Rookwood or no?
No, I did not.
Oh, okay.
Everything's fine on that. I didn't know if there was council questions on that. We provided a great deal of information on that. We're excited about that project too. It's going to really add a mix of housing product types to the market. I'm sure if you read the report, there was some comments on parking as related to that at the Planning Commission meeting, which were, there were just questions that were asked. Staff is comfortable with the parking requirements, and clearly from the perspective of maintenance of the facilities and homeowners associations, that was a question as well, and they have the homeowners association, and that will be maintained by those property owners. So there should be. Okay. There's no concerns from staff on that.
When will we see construction starting on some of these?
I don't know, but I believe there was a couple permits prior to final plat on that.
You're a good man. Okay. One final item is city manager discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Your Honor. The city received a request from the city of Decorah about whether or not we would have an interest in taking an official position on a proposed rate increase that the Alliant Energy has in front of the Iowa Utilities Board. Alliant is asking the Utilities Board to approve a large rate increase, 24.45% for residential customers, 25.29% for large general service customers, and then a little over 18% for just plain general service customers. What the difference is, where the cutoff line is, I'm not entirely sure. But the impact of Alliant on our bottom line can be pretty significant. May not seem like it when you're thinking in the context of a small building where you might have a couple $100 per month rate or a couple $100 per month electric bill. But when you look at the total book of business that the city does, exclusive of the water department, it could be as much as $126,000 based on what we paid last year. The key to it is to think about what we're paying for our electricity on all the street lights, electricity on all of the traffic signals. So if it were to pass at the current request, it would have a pretty significant impact on us, a lot of which would be felt in the general fund. Historically, they have asked for more, and then the Iowa Utilities Board has awarded less. This is the biggest one that I can remember them putting in since I've been with the city of Marion. We have never taken an official position on it with the Iowa Utilities Board, but there are cities that are looking at it and have done so, and we received a specific request about whether or not Marion would be interested in joining that. I believe the Marion Water Department has taken an official position on it in opposition to it. In fairness, they spend an awful lot on electricity. I think their total bill is comparable to the rest of us, all of our accounts combined, or may even exceed that. So again, it would have a pretty significant on the water utility as a standalone utility. The city has taken positions on issues in the past, particularly things like legislative issues where it's something of significant concern to Marion, whether it's statewide or national, but this is the first time we've been asked to weigh in on a utility rate increase. Never had the conversation, so I thought, well, I'll bring it to council and see if you have a strong feeling one way or another. Their last increase was in 2017 and was a bit over 7%. If my memory serves me correctly, they were asking for between 11 and 13, and they were awarded a bit under 8.
I will lead that charge. And
No pun intended?
Yes, I would say. Again, it comes back to that fiscal responsibility, anything that we can do to help keep these utilities down. Those are controllable expenses, and I think it is time that we start taking a stand on some of these things, and I'm excited, I guess, to start that conversation. So I don't know what we need as far as a consensus from council to move forward with that or not, but they're just like at home. We do everything we can to try to keep our utilities down. So,
what's the statement? What statement are they asking us to make, or what statement are you thinking about making?
The cities that have chosen to do so have simply passed resolutions opposing the rate increases, and then that would be submitted to the Iowa Utilities Board before they have their hearing. I think it's October 9th that is scheduled. Decorah is going further than that. Their resolution is pretty detailed and actually designates a representative to go down there and provide additional testimony during the public hearing. I was not anticipating that we would go to that stage, but merely just pass a resolution establishing a policy position if the council were to elect to do so.
I mean, certainly from the standpoint of what Randy's saying and piggybacking on that, this would be the largest rate increase they have ever asked for. And so clearly it'll have a significant impact not only on the city, but certainly all the citizens, and especially those that are retired and living on fixed income. So from that standpoint, I think I would certainly be okay with a general statement that it's too large and would have, a significant negative impact on, the majority of the community. I mean, I could support something like that. Other than that, I haven't I mean, I understand why they're asking for such a larger one because of the investments they want to make in other sources of power in the future, but I haven't looked at it enough to make any more statements beyond that as it relates to why they're asking for it. So I haven't studied it.
Yeah, I agree with Randy and Steve. I would be for putting our name on that list. Does this have anything to do with the franchise fees?
No, this is outside of the scope of the franchise fees. This would affect their base rates.
Okay. And then do we have any other option other than Alliant?
Municipalization?
Yeah.
That's the only other
Do what
alternative.
Cedar Falls did.
Yeah, I think, I mean, just as an advocate for all the citizens, of course, we would want to try to keep this as low as possible, and they're asking for, you know, what would we fall into, the 25% range that you mentioned, that they're asking for?
What I'm not 100% sure is when I said that I don't know where those classifications fall is whether or not it's an aggregate bill or single users. For example, a lot of our streetlights, because of where they're at, we might get one very large bill for our streetlights, but each individual meter may fall below the threshold.
Okay.
So I don't know that any one of our individual facilities crosses that line into the large user one. So I'm not sure whether we'd be in the 18 or the 25, but the lowest one that they're proposing is over 18.
Right, and they just increased us 2 years ago, as you said, so I would definitely be in favor of trying to advocate for the lowest increase possible.
Paul, go ahead.
I too, as well, would support us sending something forward through resolution policy statement that 25, between 18 and 25% is certainly not sustainable for us or for the folks that we're representing.
Okay.
What did you say the greatest in the past has been on?
The most recent one was 7.8, and I just can't remember if they were asking for between 11 or 13, but they were not awarded what they were asking for. But I cannot recall one since I've been here where they were asking for anything with a 2 as the first digit.
Nothing like that.
I'll agree with everyone else that we should do that. I looked up too just to see if they want 25% increase in rates, but yet last year $3.5 billion in revenues, so it's a lot of money. Yeah, I would for sure support us doing that.
Put in solar panels.
Lon, this might be a question for Amal, but I'm looking, I'm always looking at our bills on a monthly basis, and I'm looking at this month's report on 9/6 through 9/19, and the Alliant bill, or the check we're cutting to Alliant Energy is $47,000. Do we know what an approximate our line item electric bill is per year to Alliant, just off the top of our heads?
Zach had done the analysis, looked at what we spent in FY19, and then did the estimate applying the 25%, and that's where the $126,000 came from.
So you've already calculated that. Thank you.
Yep.
I knew we had talked about that, and I think that was in a previous meeting, so thank you.
Yep. Yeah, that was based off of actual bills in the last fiscal year that we paid.
You have what you need?
Yep. I would not anticipate having something on here for Thursday, just because this is fairly new and I want to do a little bit of digging on what resolution language should look like and what might be appropriate based on what you've outlined. If we have it on the first set of meetings in October, that still gives us enough time to get it to the Iowa Utilities Board for their public hearing in October.
Okay. I think that is it for tonight's meeting. Thank you, everyone. See you on Thursday.